Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Immigration and Jobs Talk Show. Today, we are diving into the world of employment based immigration, specifically focusing on the EB1A category of for IT professionals. I'm Rajni Bharara, and I'm stepping in as your host for today's show. Unfortunately, Nipasa is feeling under the weather, but that won't stop us from bringing you an insightful discussion. We already have an incredible guest joining us, immigration attorney Prashant Dubey. With his expertise, we are set for a deep dive into the EB1A category and what it means for IT professionals looking to make their mark in the United States. So, without any further ado, let's extend a warm welcome to attorney Prashant Dubey. Hi, Prashant. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Rajni. Thank you for hosting me. Thank you again to the Higher IT team. Thank you, Zayed, even though you're under the weather, for doing all the technical work in the background. Great to be here. Topic that really does interest me, right? Because it's been a recent trend within the immigration world as it relates to the uptick in the interest for the EB1A category.
Yeah, looks like everyone is under the weather these days. Last week you were, so we couldn't do the show. And
Yeah.
this week Nipasa is and also Zayed is. So yeah, I mean, I hope you're feeling fine now, but
Yeah, feeling much better. It's something whenever the season changes,
yeah.
I usually get sick at least once.
Okay, all right. So happy that now you're doing okay. But I would like to, before we move ahead, I would like to read out this important disclaimer. By watching our videos, you agree and understand that the information provided by our experts and attorneys, including comments and replies from users, is not legal advice. Use of information is at your own risk. All right. Now, everyone who's watching us live on different platforms, I would like to tell you that we are live on not just on YouTube and LinkedIn, but also on Facebook and Twitter and also on Instagram. And the handle is Immigration Talk Show. So don't forget to subscribe to us. And if you have any question to Prashant, wherever you're watching it from, please comment with your question. We'll be glad to answer your question. All right. So now let's get started. So, Prashant, before this webinar, we also were having another webinar. So I also started that webinar with the same question, and I would like to start this also with the same question. So before we delve into the topic, I would like to know from you what is that you enjoy the most about your work and about your job.
Um, so I think immigration is an extremely rewarding field, right? And I'll even put this in the context of the EB1A because that's the topic of our webinar today, right?
Right.
I've had clients who would approach me who were, dealing with the backlogs in the EB2, EB3 categories, and who felt like they got really, really close when all the priority dates moved forward between 2020 and 2022. And then they felt like, that dream of theirs was almost taken away, right? Because priority dates then retrogressed.
Mhm.
In October 2022. And so a lot of people that, had the opportunity to apply for their 45 application or thought they were about to have the opportunity, it ended up being taken away from them, right? So you
Mhm.
have individuals who now maybe did, let's say, have the ability to apply. They became interested in the EB1A because they were like, my 45 application is already in. If I get it approved, it means I get a green card, right? Because my priority date's current in the EB1 category.
Mhm.
So for me, it's about, when, last week, one of my clients who's gone through the EB1A process with me and he got his 485 application approved and he saw
Mhm.
the status new card being produced, he was like, almost on the verge of tears because this really changes the trajectory of families and generations to come, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
The fact that you can get that green card that seems like such an elusive dream sometimes, at least for people from India or people from China when they're here in the U.S. Being able to get that for them, really changes the direction of that their entire family is moving in, right? So like having that impact, I think, is
Mhm.
really makes doing immigration worth it, working with clients worth it, because you're always driving towards some personal outcome or objective of
Yeah.
theirs, and if you help fulfill it, they're the happiest people that you could possibly meet.
Yeah. Yeah, I can understand, especially bringing a smile to people's life, and they must be giving so many blessings after they
Yeah.
get their approval. Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it
So
must
I
be a
mean, yeah,
nice feeling, right?
I've gotten interesting presents. A client of mine sent me like an ice cream maker.
Wow.
Another right, another one sent me like a watch, which was automatic, and I love automatic watches. So
Wow.
yeah, it's really, really cool to see them as happy. And on the other side of it, right, a part of our practice focuses on litigation. So delayed benefits when it comes to immigration. So people that have filed for work authorization and it's maybe pending 7, 8, 9 months. I just got off the phone with someone before this webinar started about his EAD card, which is pending for 9 months. And we had filed a lawsuit against USCIS to extract the approval. And he was like, I have a job offer that I've been unable to accept for 9 months because of this EAD card delay, right? And now I can go and finally tell them, like, yes, I'm ready to join, right? He's going to be, bringing income into his family. So, people really get excited about those things, when their processes are stuck or when they're not getting the outcome that they're looking for.
Okay. All right. So, well, also, before I ask my question, I would like to tell you that if Prashant's friends or relatives are also watching this show, if you are planning to gift him anything, so he himself has told us that he like automatic watches. So now you know what to gift him, during the festivals and also on his birthday. Okay, now
There
let's
you go.
yeah, let's move to our topic now, Prashant. So I would like to know from you, so what are the most recent developments and updates in USCIS policies and procedures regarding EB1A petitions for IT professionals, and how can one ensure compliance with these changes?
Yeah, yeah. So I would say the biggest changes, at least recently, maybe over the last 2 to 3 months, have been around the fee structure.
Okay.
So, effective February of this year, USCIS increased the premium processing fee that's associated with I-140 applications. So, I-140 applications are what are used to file an EB-1A self-petition, right? Along with it goes this I-907 request for premium processing. And in the past, it was just $2,500.
Mhm.
Now it's 2,805. In addition to that, they've also increased the I-140 application fee. So effective April 1st of this year, it went from $700 to $715. And then they also introduced for all I-140 applicants, whether you're an employer, whether you're a self-petitioner, it doesn't matter, you have to pay an asylum program fee.
Mhm.
And that can be, if you're a self-petitioner, that's, within the context of an EB1A applicant, that is $300. So they've increased the fees, I would say, by about, $630
Mhm.
for my EB1A applicants, just over the last 2 months, right? I would say that's the biggest development. The other development dating back to September 2023, so it's not completely recent, but it's not, very old either.
Mhm.
6 months ago, USCIS on their policy manual, they released very specific guidance and clarifying guidance on how individuals can satisfy the 10 criteria that USCIS has set out for EB1A applicants. So for somebody that doesn't know, what an EB1A application entails, high level, it's a self petition. You don't need employer sponsorship like you would for EB2 or EB3, and
Mhm.
you need to prove to USCIS that you can satisfy 3 out of 10 of their criteria. And in the past, there wasn't exactly, very good guidance from USCIS
Mhm.
in terms of, how one should go about developing, the criteria and the exhibits for the criteria. But September of last year, they actually released some information, and I believe it's because probably over the last year, they've also been, just excuse me, I'm getting my charger.
Mhm.
They've also been getting an influx of EB1A applications, right? Because you have a lot of people from EB2, EB3 categories who are now trying to jump ship into
Mhm.
EB1A. And I think in the last year, they've had over 100,000 EB1A applicants. or at least an increase by that number. So it's significant. And so they're beginning to realize that unless they put out some guidance, people are going to be trying to make arguments on these criteria in very different ways. And so I'll give you an example.
Sure.
Last year, we filed an EB1A for an applicant who worked for the city of Baltimore. And he had direct reports. He had people reporting up to him. He was making hiring and firing decisions for the city of Baltimore. And what we argued was that, hey, USCIS has this criteria that says you should, one of the criteria is, have you been judging the work of others, right? And essentially what USCIS is getting at is, are you such an expert in the field that people are coming to you to
Hmm.
be a judge of their work, of their implementations, of the
Right.
things that they're
Hmm.
doing, right? Are you reviewing conference papers? Are you reviewing, journal publications? And so we used to, play in the gray area with that
Hmm.
criteria. And what I mean by that is we took this applicant who was, technically reviewing the work of
Hmm.
other people, of his direct reports. He was making hiring and firing decisions. So he was doing performance reviews, right? He was reviewing resumes.
Right.
And at that time last year, USCIS accepted that criteria along with the others that we had filed for him.
Hmm.
Now, in September, what they said was when we think about reviewing the work of others, it cannot be a part of your day-to-day job, right?
Yeah.
So they issued this clarifying guidance saying, hey, just because you're interviewing people and you're reviewing resumes and you're doing performance reviews of your direct reports, or you have mentor-mentee relationships, that no longer counts. And we're being very clear about that, right? So it has to be something that you're doing in the industry. So that's how some of the, I would say, at least not necessarily the rules or regulations changed, but their policies became a little bit more clear in terms of what does or does not qualify for each of the criteria. Another example is salary, right?
Hmm.
In the
Hmm.
past, we were able to take statistics from databases like ONET. We were able to take information from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but now that's not enough. They want you to be very, very specific. So, for example, when I file an EB1A application for a software developer that works specifically, within cybersecurity, I
Hmm.
compare his wages against other cybersecurity software developers, not just, the general field of software
Hmm.
development or software engineering,
Hmm.
right? And so that's the type of guidance that they issued about 6 months ago, which was a big change in terms of how we are interpreting these rules and these different criteria, and how we support the argument that goes behind them.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much for explaining it in so much detail and also with giving so many examples, Prashant. And before I actually asked you this question, you also mentioned about someone you knew, who had his EB1A application filed, and he was waiting to get it approved for 9 months, I guess, right? If I'm not wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
I would like to talk about timelines now. So if you can please also explain about, can you explain the process of obtaining an EB1A and the typical timeline? And what's the
yeah,
timeline that is involved?
yeah. So the individual that I mentioned about the 9 months was specific to his EAD card processing.
Hmm.
So that was an H4 EAD card,
Okay.
but EB1A applications also have a very similar timeline, right? And typically, I like to explain it from the perspective of, when a client approaches me or our firm to initiate the EB1A process. And so what I first tell them is, hey, please send me your resume, right? I want to take a look at your profile. I want to understand which organizations you've worked for, what projects have you done, what your education level is, what kind of certifications have you achieved? Because at first glance, I can go into that call knowing if this person's already ready to move into the next stages,
Right.
or is this going to be more a roadmap conversation, right? So I let them know that too, right? Like, hey, I'm now sending you my consultation agreement now that I've seen your resume.
Hmm.
You will have either one of two outcomes. Either we will keep moving down this road,
Hmm.
or I will send you back with information, with action items on how you can improve your profile to become EB1A eligible, right? because you might satisfy one or two of the criteria. You might not have number three. I love it when we have four or five. But if we can't get that, you need to at least hit three. And if you're not doing that, spend the next 6 to 12 months doing it, right?
Mhm.
Because what you have to gain over time is so critical, right? If you're
Mhm.
stuck in EB2, EB3, and your priority date is, let's say, 2017, 2018, you're probably not getting your green card for 20 years. So if you spend, a year developing your EB1A profile or 2 years developing it, you're
Mhm.
going to probably save 15 plus years in processing time, right? To
Mhm.
get your green card.
Mhm.
So I make that very clear. And after that, we get on the assessment call where we discuss the EB1A process,
Mhm.
their credentials, and really how they map to the criteria that I believe they're going to satisfy.
Mhm.
And typically, where I see my IT professionals, and this is kind of a niche that I've developed over the last year, where my clients are not academics, they are not researchers, they are not working in an academic setting. I
Right.
did have one outlier client who was a dentist many, many years ago who got the EB1A, but 90% of my clients are in software engineering, software development, product development, security engineering, those fields, data
Mhm.
engineering.
Mhm.
Um, and where I typically see that they satisfy the criteria is, have their projects been critical and impactful? Have their projects been innovative?
Mhm.
And typically they command a high salary, which is the
Mhm.
third criteria. If we can get numbers four and five, like reviewing the work of others or memberships in organizations that demand outstanding achievement, that's absolutely fantastic. We'll make the argument on that, right?
Yeah.
But those are the top three criteria that I typically see my IT professionals fall in.
Okay.
And once we identify that, I send them back with homework. I say, look, pick the top 3 to 5 most impactful projects that you've worked on throughout your career.
Okay.
Describe them to me. What did you do on them? What were your specific contributions? Who did you work with
Mhm.
that is willing to provide a recommendation letter? Because recommendation letters really drive two of the criteria, which is, has your work been innovative and has your work been critical to the
Mhm.
organizations you've worked for? And so once they assemble all of that information, typically in a Google Doc, and they send it to me, I'll review it. I'll kind of poke holes in their descriptions, and I'll ask them,
Mhm.
"Hey, can you maybe quantify your impact here, or could you maybe provide a specific data point there?" Right? Because USCIS wants to see, okay, not only did you do well on these projects and you were a good performer, but like, how did you influence the organization? How did you impact the industry through your work, right?
Okay.
And
Mhm.
oftentimes that involves figuring out, what was the ROI, return on investment that I delivered? What was the
Mhm.
cost savings I delivered, right? How did
Mhm.
this impact the organization's bottom line? That sort of
Mhm.
thing. Now, if they also hit the other criteria, let's say salary, I asked for W-2s, I asked for recent pay stubs. Let's say they satisfy. So recently, I had a client, two clients, in fact, where they're both security professionals, and they have what's called a CISSP certification,
Mhm.
which in the cybersecurity world, also, please don't ask me what CISSP stands for. Couldn't tell you. I just know that's the acronym. But
Mhm.
um, only 90,000 people in the US have a CISSP. It is one of the cybersecurity certifications that even the US government says, in order to work on projects, security projects that are relevant to the US government, you need a
Mhm.
CISSP, right?
Mhm.
You need to have experience of about 8 years specifically within the cybersecurity domain, right? So sometimes you get clients like that who have very specialized certifications that we can make an argument that, hey, look, this certification makes him a member of a community that
Right.
is very difficult to be a
Mhm.
part of. I had another client who was a chartered financial analyst, a CFA. CFA requires over 2,000 hours of study, right?
Mhm.
And work experience. So we were able to make an argument for him, on that criteria as well, in addition to the other, again, baseline criteria that I see of criticality, innovation, and salary, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes you get really lucky, and I've seen clients who, are just studs in their industry. And what I mean by that is they're also doing research publications, and
Mhm.
they have patents to their name, and their patents have been cited, right? And they're doing really cool things in machine learning and generative AI, where you're able to get arguments number 5 and 6 sometimes, right?
Mhm.
With the by way of those publications. Um, so once I have all of that information, we
Mhm.
make a decision on whether we're going to again continue down this process, or does it make sense to wait and improve your credentials a little bit more. And for those that need improvement, again, we will create a roadmap on how you can build towards an EB1A profile. So
Okay.
once I have kind of all the information, all the project documentation I need, I begin to draft the recommendation letters for them. And I typically say, hey, you'll need about 2 recommendation letters per project. One
Mhm.
person to talk about how your role was critical, second person to talk about how your contributions were innovative, if they were, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and once we've identified who those individuals are, I'll draft the letters. I'll send them back to my client, so that they can take it to the recommenders and just get it signed off. Right? We want to make this very easy, because if we ask recommenders to write letters themselves, they're probably going to take a couple months to do it. Right?
Mhm.
Whereas if you do it for them and you give them everything they need to sign off on, you get very little pushback. You can, of course, ask them to tweak things, or add their own flavor to it. But if they just want to sign off on it, minimal lift, they can do that too. Once the letters come back, I draft an EB1A brief, right? Which essentially is a 25-30 page document explaining how the various criteria are met and how this
Mhm.
individual would be beneficial to the US. We then also collect the civil documents like passport, I-94 record, I-797As, and finalize the I-140 application for filing. Most of my clients do it in premium, so we get a decision back in 15 days. Let's say
Mhm.
that decision is an approval. If it is an approval and your priority date is current, we basically can file your 45 applications for a green card within a week. So one of my security professionals got an approval last week. I am filing his 45 application tomorrow. So that's how quickly we can turn things around,
Mhm.
um, throughout this entire process. Now, once the 45 application goes to USCIS, that one can take on average 6 to 10 months to get approved. I have seen some people get it really quickly. Like I've had clients get it in 2 months. I've
Mhm.
had some get it in 4, but on average, I see 6 to 10 months, in terms of processing of the green card application itself. Um, so that's kind of end to end what an EB1A process would look like,
Wow.
with us.
Amazing, amazing. And thank you so much for, actually taking us into each and every step of the timelines. And thank you so much for answering it in so much detail. So thank you so much, Prashant, for that. And but before I jump into my next question, and also a lot of questions have already started coming from our lovely viewers. So before I take their question and ask my next question, you mentioned that the first step that you do when someone wants to say file an EB1A application. So I think the first step that you do is ask for their resume and look into their resume, right? So I
Yeah.
would like to know from you, for the ones who must be thinking or planning of getting, or filing their EB1A application. So to them, what would you like to tell them? How should they draft their resume, and what should they have in their resume, so that the not just the immigration attorneys, but others will also get attracted just by looking into their resumes. What should they have in that?
Yeah. Yeah. I would say your work experience is obviously very important, right?
Okay.
But also being able to quantify, the project details, right? Sometimes what I often see with IT professionals is they're very technical and very, technology savvy. And they can talk about their technical tasks all day.
Mhm.
But when it comes to communicating business outcomes, that's often where we need to tease out those project details. And what I mean by business outcomes is great, you implemented a technology, and these are all the things you did to implement that technology. But USCIS, on top of that, what they care about is what did it mean for the organization, right? What outcome were you driving for the organization? So, for example, I've had a client who, worked at one of the big tech companies, and his project was related to large language models.
Mm-hmm.
And even though, we could talk through all of the technology stack he was working with, the technical tasks that he did, one thing that was missing was, well, why is this important for this organization, right? So ask yourself that question. If you don't know the business outcome, you're going to have a very challenging time with USCIS because they are not technologists, right?
Yeah.
They're not, you're going to be educating them on the things you're doing, but what's really going to resonate is the outcome you drove,
Mm.
by way of your projects, right? And how you got recognized for it. Were you invited to speak about it, let's say at an industry conference, things like that. So that's really important. So I would say make sure you can qualify or quantify the business outcome that have been associated with your projects. Make sure you've listed all of your certifications, no matter how small.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure your education credentials are on your resume. I would also say, if you've been, even if you published one paper, include that, right? If you've been invited to a speaking engagement, include that. And the reason why I say that is last year I got a resume of an individual where on the face of it, I was like, okay, he might satisfy two or three criteria because his resume didn't include any of his authorship or any of his awards and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. And so when I got into the call with him, he started mentioning all of these other things. And I was like, you're actually going to hit probably six of these criteria, right? Like three are on your
Yeah.
resume,
Uh-huh.
but your publications are not. Your conference and paper reviews are not, and your awards are not, right? So like three complete, like we just opened the door to three new criterias, just by having that discussion. So, no matter how small it is, definitely include it on your resume because we can at least try to make an argument, on one of the criteria for it.
Wow. Okay. So let's just say don't be humble.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But are there any mistakes that people often do at this crucial step that you would like to pinpoint?
Yeah, so I would say make sure that you've got work products. This is something that is often overlooked for various reasons. If
Mm-hmm.
it's a previous employer, sometimes it's difficult to find the work product, right? Like your emails, your PowerPoint presentations, things like that, because
Right.
it happened 5 years ago. You don't have access to it anymore, right? But if there's something newsworthy, right, you can always, the way we would develop something like that, because I do have clients that did amazing things 10 years ago and they lost access to it. And so what we would do is we would draft a recommendation letter. And then if there's something newsworthy that's happened in the industry based on that project, we would, layer that on as an additional exhibit
Mm-hmm.
in conjunction with the recommendation letter. But what I always say to people is if you can keep your work product somewhere, right? Like the PowerPoint presentations you've developed, the white papers you've developed, the emails you've sent as it relates to your most impactful projects, um,
Mm-hmm.
that's always important because if you can have a recommendation letter plus a work product plus something newsworthy, you've
Mm-hmm.
just layered on three exhibits for each project, right? Which becomes a very compelling reason to satisfy the criticality criteria or the innovation criteria. So I would say that's oftentimes one of the most overlooked things is people just forget to,
Yeah.
maybe save those items and stash it away in their own folder. All things that you've created and
Mm-hmm.
that you have ownership rights to.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for taking all the follow-up question that I had for you, Prashant. Thank you so much for that. And now, about this next question, which was there already, on the questionnaire that I sent you. So this particular question that I would like to know before I ask you about this question. So people often get confused about EB1A and H1B, right? So this is
Yeah,
about that. So if you can
yeah.
please let us know the main difference between EB1A and H1B, and how can someone determine which one is best as an IT professional?
Yeah, yeah. So the confusion often arises because H-1B is work authorization, right? And EB, the employment-based categories, whether it's EB1, EB2, EB3, those are all paths to get to a green card.
Mm-hmm.
And the H-1B is temporary work authorization. So you can come here, you can stay for 6 years, work on your H-1B, um, but unless you have an employer that sponsors you for the EB2 or EB3 categories, typically, you can't extend beyond those 6 years. EB1, what it is that it's a self petition, right? So it is something that you're allowed to be the authorized signatory on that I-140 application, right? So it's unlike EB2 or EB3 sponsorship, in which the employer signs off on the application. The EB1 is all you, it's all the client, and you can self petition it. So you might be on an H-1B work authorization status, right, which is a temporary work authorization status, but the employment-based categories, the sponsorship, whether it's from EB2 or EB3, or the self-sponsorship in EB1, is the actual thread that gets you to a green card, which is kind of the end goal for most people here.
Yeah.
So it can be very confusing in that people use these terms interchangeably, and oftentimes you'll have H-1B saying, "Oh, I'm doing EB2 or an EB3," and it's like, wait, you're on H-1, so now what is this EB2 and EB3 thing that's going on, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's your ability to work beyond those 6 years, right? You can essentially extend your H-1B indefinitely until your priority date is current if you get EB2 or EB3 sponsorship, or even if you self-sponsor an EB-1A. But oftentimes, if you self-sponsor an EB-1A, I'm finding my clients at least have priority dates. You
Mm-hmm.
know, the priority date right now is 2021, but they have priority dates from 2016, 2015, 2017. Once they get the EB-1A approval, they're just going right ahead and applying for their green card applications, um, which is, you're cutting out so many years of wait time.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you so much for answering the question, Prashant. Now let's quickly move on to our next question. The next question that I have for you is about the basic requirements for an IT professional to qualify for the EB1A category. So, what are the key points to highlight? If you can please talk about
Yeah,
this.
yeah. So my IT clients, again, USCIS has laid out 10 criteria, of
Mm-hmm.
which you need to satisfy at least three. And then you also need to prove that you would be a benefit to the United States. And I know you've got a question about that second one later on, so we'll get to it. But in terms of just those 10 criteria, right? Oftentimes where I see my clients fall in is first one being, has your work been critical for the organizations you've worked with? Second one being, has your work been innovative, right? So has it influenced the industry? Third one being, typically my clients command a high salary.
Mm-hmm.
So if we just take those three, right, and you're able to put together a strong argument around those three, you have the makings of an EB1A case. Then you just need to prove that you satisfy the, benefit to the U.S. requirement.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for criticality, I always say you want to think about ROI, cost savings.
Yeah.
What business outcome did you deliver for your organization? For innovation, we're always looking at influence in the industry, right? So, for example, I've had clients that have, worked at an organization that allowed them to create like a big data model. And then they were asked to come and speak about that big data model at an industry conference. Okay. The only reason you were invited to come speak about that is because it was innovative, it was groundbreaking. You did something novel, something
Yeah.
new, or something important that the industry wants to hear about. So that's one way we can prove that your work was innovative is people have asked you to come and talk about it, right? Or the implementation was newsworthy. Uh, the other way is if you have patents to your name, have those patents been cited within the industry, right? So I've had clients with patents that have received citations from big organizations like Apple, Meta,
Okay.
Google, Amazon, right? So that shows that not only did you create this new idea, this new way of methodology, this new, technical implementation, but other big companies or other organizations, they don't have to be massive, but other organizations are citing to that patent, to that creation. That's always important. And then salary, always an objective one, right?
Right.
W-2, pay stubs, that sort of thing. The other ones where I've seen sometimes folks satisfy the requirements is, as I mentioned earlier, membership in organizations that require outstanding achievement. So that can be some form of certification, like a CISSP, a CFA. That can be membership in something like a Mensa type of a group, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it has a very high threshold to entry. Um, I've also seen reviewing or judging the work of others. So typically, how my IT clients satisfy this requirement, especially after the changes last September, is that they will, I've had clients that will go to an organization and say, hey, I heard you're doing this specific product implementation. I'm actually an expert in
Mm-hmm.
that specific product. Can I come in and do a review, an assessment almost of that product implementation? I will give you guidance on whether it's well architected. I will give you guidance on, whether it's performing and scaling to capacity. I will give you guidance on instance sizes, right? So, my cloud technologist will understand what that means. Different storage classes that need to be used, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you can do that in the industry, create a work product, create an assessment report, and be able to say to USCIS,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I satisfy this requirement because I have reviewed a product or technical implementation of another organization out in the industry, right? Um, the other one sometimes that we get is authorship
Mm-hmm.
of scholarly articles. I would say, my IT folks are not usually academics, but sometimes you get people that do have that in their background. And that's, really where I see my clients land, is around those, between those five or six criteria, out of the 10. And again, you only need three, right? So
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. Thank you so much, Prashant, for answering each and every question in so much detail. And I can see a lot of question coming from a lot of viewers, not just on YouTube, but have also posted on Facebook, LinkedIn. Ehsan is here. Ehsan Ali has posted it on Facebook. And then Vishnu Singh is here. Pradeep is here. And Ricky. Anaswara. So, hi to all of you. We are soon going to take up your question. Please, I would like you to just stay tuned with us with Prashant's wealth of knowledge. We are having an enlightening discussion. But before we delve deeper and before we take up your question, we would like to go for a short break. So, stay tuned because when we return, we'll take your questions. So, Prashant, let's go for a short break. And after we return, we'll be taking these questions.
Are you an IT consultant seeking a new opportunity? We offer job placement services for US citizens, green cards, EADs, and visa holders. We also sponsor various work visas like H1B, E3, TN, and green cards. 20 plus years of experience in the industry. Exceptional employee benefits. Highly rated by our employees. Global presence with 200 plus recruiters and direct clients. Connect with us. Call us on the number 732-707-9151 or mail us at rajni@higheritpeople.com or visit our website www.higheritpeople.com.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you all are feeling refreshed and ready to continue our discussion on the EB1A category for IT professionals with attorney Prashant Dubey. And now, also to the audiences, I would like to tell you that if you're watching the video after the live session has ended, you can continue to post your questions. My team will help you with the answer. All right. So now, without any further ado, Prashant, let's quickly take our questions. So, first question I would like to take is of Ehsan, and Ehsan has posted it on Facebook, and he says, "Thank you for your detailed discussion about the EB1A. Thank you so much for joining, Ehsan. Is it true that applying with premium processing increases the likelihood of receiving a request for evidence (RFE)?" And he also has a follow up, which says, is IEEE senior membership count in membership criteria? Let's take one by one. Let's take the first part. Prashant, somehow we can't hear you. Oh, okay.
I was muted. My bad. So I haven't seen that filing in premium processing increases my client's chance of getting an RFE, right? Oftentimes, the RFEs that we do get, and keep in mind, it's a very subjective experience for the officer, right? I have filed EB1A applications where I only had 4 recommendation letters. Um, the person's innovation was not in the industry, yet they got approved. I've had individuals that will satisfy each criteria in 4 different ways, and they'll get an RFE, right? Both filed in premium,
Mm-hmm.
completely different results, right? Um, so the RFE is really up to the officer. Whether you do it in premium, whether you do it in regular, it really doesn't matter. If you get an officer that wants to be hardlined about his interpretation of these rules and these criteria, you're going to get an RFE anyways. Um, if you get an officer that's very lenient, who again feels like you satisfy it in different ways, you'll get an approval regardless of how it works. And I have another example of that too, right? Where one of my clients, they worked at Comcast, and we filed his EB1A application in September of last year. He got an RFE. We responded back to it. He ended up getting a denial. We kind of sat down and discussed, and he goes, Prashant, what do you think about just refiling? He was like, just let's just send the same set of documents again.
Uh-huh.
I was like, that's a thought, right? Let's not appeal it. Let's not appeal this decision. Let's just refile it. Sure. It got approved in a week.
Wow.
So what that tells me is like it really depends on the USCIS officer you get routed to. It can, you can end up in an RFE and a denial, refile it, and you'll get an approval, right? Because it just goes to somebody different and they think you've satisfied the criteria a different way, right? So premium, no premium doesn't matter, comes down to the officer. I have another example of that. The guy did get an approval. So recently, it was like November of last year. One of my clients who works at Meta, he helps set up their data centers for like machine learning and generative AI and all those cool buzzwords that Meta is trying to do now. And he went to another attorney. He took my work product. He went to another attorney and he goes, hey, can you give me your guidance? Do you think I satisfy the criteria? This is what Prashant is telling me, but I want to hear it from you. So he pays him to review all of the work I did. And
Wow.
the attorney says, look, I don't think you satisfy it. I think you're going to have an uphill battle. And I kind of stood my ground. I was like, dude, we've been working on this application for 8 weeks. You got strong arguments. Don't doubt yourself now. We filed it in premium and he got an approval, right? So even attorneys are very subjective in their interpretation of how people satisfy, the
Mm-hmm.
requirements. So at the end of the day, like if you just get a USCIS officer who wants to give you a hard time, they will for any and every reason.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you just refile the same thing and it gets an approval. So
Wow. Amazing. Thank you so much for the answer, Prashant. And thank you so much for the question, Ehsan. I hope you're happy and satisfied with the answer. But now let's take up your next question. The next question that he wants to know about is IEEE senior membership count in membership criteria? I mean, he means to say Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers.
It might be. I know IEEE is also like a publication. Um,
Okay.
I haven't encountered a client who is a part of IEEE and is a senior member, right? So from my perspective, I would need to do a little bit more digging in terms of understanding what are their bylaws? What are the criteria for membership, right? Is it you just pay a fee and you volunteer and you become a senior member? Or is it actually like a selective process, right? And is it very difficult to get in? And what are the criteria behind it, right? Did it require interviews? Did it require you taking a test? Did it require you having a certain amount of work experience, right? Um, so once we kind of get those details and extrapolate those details,
Mm-hmm.
we can make an argument accordingly. I had never heard of a CISSP certification in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Not my field, right? Don't work in cybersecurity, but I had a client who has it, and I was like, all right, tell me more, right? And so during that assessment process, we were able to extract those details in terms of exactly what the CISSP involves. And I said, yeah, let's go for it. And we were able to satisfy it. So I would say, I would need to do a little bit of research on my end in order to give you a proper answer on that.
All right. Or maybe, Ehsan, what you can do is you can directly get in touch with Prashant. You can connect with him via his email. His email ID is info@dubeylawoffice.com. See, you can also see it on the screen. You can note it down for yourself. info@dubeylawoffice.com. You can write to him, and you can directly get in touch with him. He'll be able to help you with a detailed answer after doing his research. So Ehsan is actually back. He has posted the link, I think, to the website here. But Ehsan, like I suggested, just directly, I would suggest you to get in touch with Prashant. He'll be able to help you after he's done with his research on what you are trying to ask him. And now let's quickly take our next question. So the next question that we have is from. Okay, so there are a lot of viewers. So let's take Pradeep. Okay, Vishnu Singh's question. So Vishnu wants to know, how does the EB1A category for extraordinary ability differ from other employment-based visa categories available to IT professionals, such as the EB2 or EB3 categories?
Yeah. So there's two things, right? Two very major things. One is EB2 and EB3 requires employer sponsorship. So if
Mhm.
you don't have an employer willing to sponsor you in EB2 and EB3, you're not going to get the sponsorship. Second one is EB2 and EB3, the priority dates are in 2012. So if an employer is sponsoring somebody, let's say this year, and your priority date is 2024 as of the date of filing your perm, it's going to take you a very long time for your priority date to become current, right? Like there are people way smarter than I am out there that are doing analysis on how these priority dates move and progress. And there's crazy stuff that's like, it's going to take 100 years for my priority date to become current. Or, I might as well have a US citizen child and they're going to sponsor me at the age of 21 anyways. And I'm like, yeah, I think that's probably a more reasonable argument, where people are waiting decades.
Mm,
And to have, like the reason why priority dates progressed in 2020 to 2022 is because we really had a once in a generation type of an event in COVID. So, something like that happens every once in 100 years, maybe, right?
mhm,
So if you think about it, if something like that's not going to happen for another 100 years, we're kind of stuck dealing with the backlog and the priority dates that we have right now, right?
mhm,
So the priority dates for EB1 is in 2021, right? And it
mhm,
moves much faster than EB2 and EB3, and you can self-sponsor it. So that's why it's become so attractive to my clients who are in the EB2, EB3 categories that might have priority dates before 2021 because they're like, oh, I can port my priority date from those categories into EB1. That makes me current in EB1. I can get my green card application filed as a result, right? The other, I'd say the third major difference, right, other than priority date, other than, employer sponsorship, is the threshold. Getting an EB1 requires a very high threshold, right? EB2 and EB3 does not ask for you satisfying 3 out of 10 criteria and proving why you're going to be beneficial to the United States, right? EB1 does. So it takes 8 to 12 weeks to develop an EB1 case, an EB1 application, at least for us. We take a very long time to make sure we're putting out a good, solid 600, 700 page work product that goes to USCIS. And, I hope they read it because we took a lot of time putting it together. But yeah, those are the major differences.
Okay, so thank you so much for pointing out the differences, Prashant and Vishnu. I hope now you're clear with the differences between EB1A, EB2, and EB3 categories. Now let's quickly move to our next viewer. So the next viewer that we have is Pradeep, and Pradeep wants to know: can you provide guidance on how to document my membership and participation in prestigious associations and organizations, and how can I demonstrate the selectivity and exclusivity of these groups?
Yeah. Yeah. So the way we typically do it is, let's say if it's around a certification, right? Obviously, having a copy of that certificate helps. After that, it's all research, right? So going and getting the bylaws for the organization, going and getting anything that's been talked about with regards to the organization, like in the news, right? To talk about the prestige, and how they only accept exceptional people, or how exclusive they are. um, the other thing is, your interaction within that organization, right? Like email threads that you've been on, work products you've created for the organization or that you are required to create for the organization. So those are all the types of exhibits that we use. Sometimes it can be invitation letters, sometimes it can be thank you notes, sometimes it can be welcome letters, right? In the form, typically now in the form of emails, right? On top of those certificates, or the membership card. And then after that, on top of, let's say, the certificate, membership card, on top of the research, if you can get a recommendation letter from somebody, let's say, that's on the board of directors, or from even another member who's familiar with your work in the industry and how you are an expert, and how you came to achieve membership, that can also help. So I would say a recommendation letter is oftentimes something that we get as well.
Right.
Um, and that can take many forms. So recently, I filed an EB1A for just this amazing individual within the cybersecurity profession who's done review work, and is also part of the Cloud Security Alliance. So he's a member of the CSA, and he's also done review work for the CSA. And they issued him a very specific certificate, outlining, like his membership in the CSA, like which work stream he heads up, and the fact that he's doing review work for the CSA, right? So we used it for 2 criteria essentially. But I would say, yeah, letters like that, are things that we can also draft up so that you can prove that criteria.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Pradeep, for your question. I hope you have got the answer, and thank you so much, Prashant. I know you have to leave, and I know you're really busy and you have to leave. So unfortunately, everyone, I would like to tell you that that's all the questions we are going to take for today, and that's all the time we have for the questions today. But if you want to connect with Prashant directly, you can connect with him via his email. His email ID is info@dubeylawoffice.com. And if you're looking for a project placement or visa sponsorship, you can reach out to me on my number, which is +1 732 707 9151. My email is rajni@higheritpeople.com. You can also visit our website, which is higheritpeople.com. Remember, we also sponsor H-1B visas and other work visas based on job availability and regulations. And that concludes today's webinar on building a profile to qualify for the EB1A category as an IT professional. So a huge thank you, Prashant. I know you're busy, but thank you so much for taking our time and doing this show. Means a lot.
No, thank you. Thank you to the team. And I can't wait to do part 2 of this episode next week.
Yes, I was about to say that. So let's continue because we still have a lot of questions from the audiences and also, of my own questions. So let's continue with our second part of this episode next week.
Awesome. Thank you.
Amazing. All right. So everyone, I would like to tell you that there's more. Don't go anywhere because at 2 p.m. sharp, we have another special show lined up for you. We'll be focusing on F1 topic questions with none other than former US Consular Officer Yvette Bansal. So stay tuned for more expert insights and valuable information. Until then, take care, stay informed, and keep on watching and keep on subscribing to Immigration and Jobs Talk Show. I'm your host, Rajni Bharara, signing off for now. Bye.
You an IT consultant seeking a new opportunity? We offer job placement services for US citizens, green cards, EADs, and visa holders. We also sponsor various work visas like H-1B, E3, TN, and green cards. 20 plus years of experience in the industry. Exceptional employee benefits. Highly rated by our employees. Global presence with 200 plus recruiters and direct clients. Connect with us. Call us on the number 732-707-9151 or mail us at rajni@higheritpeople.com or visit our website www.higheritpeople.com.